Thanks for being here. Subscribe to Cheating Stories Best, so you don't miss new stories.
I stood in front of the full-length mirror in the bathroom and smiled. I looked good at 45. I had a slender figure with curves in the right places. Large, still perky breasts were my defining feature. My hips were wider than they were in my 20s, but I had a flat stomach. My butt was not saggy. I owed that to my personal trainer who made me work on it. I was wearing my sexiest bra and panties, lovely black lace with a sheer nylon set that was more for my partner than a robe. I wondered, what does Simon prefer? I pushed that thought aside as I put on the red dress my husband loves so much. It was short but still tasteful, showing just enough cleavage to seduce and attract attention without being overly revealing. It was super sexy for my husband. I sat down at the dressing table and straightened my hair in anticipation of my big night. I got my hair done, expensive but worth every penny. I put on light makeup. I knew Simon liked this look better as he mentioned it as one of my best features. We had lunch several times a week, and at some point, our conversations turned to personal matters. Simon was dashing. I know that's an old-fashioned description, but it fits him perfectly. He was my age, impeccably dressed, and carried himself with a class last seen in actors from those old movies my husband loved so much. I didn't mention that he's handsome. Simon has a square jaw, a proud Roman nose, and the most amazing blue eyes I've ever seen. His body was sculpted from his dedication to training, which marked the beginning of our transition from simple collaboration to something more personal. One day, he commented on my fitness and asked where I trained. It was a breakthrough from talking about work to personal conversations. He began to flatter me, and I assumed that this was how all workplace romances began: simple pleasantries, a compliment on my dress, a mention of my change in hairstyle, an innocent touch, the beginning of the downfall of a previously happily married woman. This evening, we had to intensify our casual relationship. Simon suggested we go out for dinner and have martinis. It took me 2 days to agree. It wasn't that I was unhappy with my husband. I think we were just comfortable with each other. Simon was like a new drug, another high that thrilled my senses and made me addicted. After my makeup was carefully applied, I smiled to myself. I knew that he would love me like this. I planned to knock him down and I wouldn't fail. I have to be perfect. My thoughts were distracted by the opening of the garage. Joe was on time as usual. He was a creature of habit. I calculated everything. I knew exactly when he would walk through the kitchen and notice that dinner wasn't ready. He looked around the first floor looking for me and found nothing. I wanted him to find me dressed for an evening walk around the city, a big part of my plans for the evening, the reveal. When Simon suggested we go on a date, I knew what it meant. We were not children. He expected everything from me, and I was going to give it to him. He made reservations at my favorite restaurant, booked a table at my favorite jazz club for a martini, and the finishing touch was the room he booked at the Hyatt. He couldn't invite me to his house. He was also married, and his wife would have been just as upset as my husband. I knew Joe would get over it eventually. Our love was completely safe, but I couldn't hide it from him. I knew I had to tell him what I was going to do that evening. My best friend Carla told me it was the dumbest thing I'd ever planned to do. She seemed to think that Joe wouldn't forgive me, although she didn't know him as well as I did. Until that moment, I had lived with him for 23 years and knew him like the back of my hand. Joe called me and I checked one last time. I have to be ready when he comes into the room. It was important to me that he saw me dressed impeccably, cool, and sexy. I stepped into my heels and went to look for a suitable handbag. When he entered the room, I took a deep breath and stepped away from the closet to make my big statement. "Hey, baby," he said with a big smile. "Why are you so dressed up, Joe?" "I need you to sit down. I have something to tell you, and it may be difficult for you to hear." He looked at me as if I had two heads but sat down in a chair by our window. "Joe, this is how I'm dressed for today's date. I want to give my man the best from head to toe, mind, body, and soul." He looked sad. "I hoped I didn't break it too much, darling." I had lunch several times a week with a man from work named Simon. A tear rolled down his cheek. I had to gather my courage to continue the story. "No, we didn't have an affair. I never held his hand, never hugged him, never kissed him, Joe." His head was in his hands. He ran his hands through his hair and looked at me like a beaten man. He didn't say anything. "Joe, he invited me to have dinner with him tonight, and I'm being completely upfront and honest with you. He's booked a hotel room. I'm sorry to say it took me 2 days to agree. I felt like it wouldn't be cheating if I told you." He looked out the window and asked, "Sorry it took so long, or sorry you agreed?" "Oh, and it won't be cheating unless I agree." I sighed. Joe, I've loved you most of my adult life, only you. I felt like I deserved a short break from us. Does it make sense? No, not in the slightest, he answered quickly. I nodded. That's why I'm dressed like this. I told you this is for my man. You're my man, Joe. You will always be him. I don't understand. You said this idiot booked the room and you agreed. It's right. I agreed but canceled the meeting at noon today. Why? I was sitting at my desk and got excited, really turned on, but it wasn't because of Simon. I was looking at a photo of us on the beach in Cancun. You were shirtless and wearing your swim trunks. God, you look so good in this photo. At that moment, I realized that I didn't need Simon. I already have you. He turned away from me. I walked up to him and hugged him from behind. Joe, I know I have to confess what I was going to do. I was such a fool and I'm so sorry. I was hoping that you could forgive my momentary stupidity and invite me somewhere tonight. I took Simon's words as if they were for you and me and not for him. First of all, I felt him take a deep breath. Joe, my love, what about Simon? Then I smiled and turned to face him. I called his wife and told her everything. Simon has a bigger problem than me canceling my appointment with him. You agreed anyway. I know, and I have to live with this mistake, but please show me mercy, I admitted. He snorted. You only did it to ease your conscience. I fell to my knees. Please forgive me, I was a fool. He lifted my chin and said, I will forgive you, but you betrayed my trust. I will never forget this. I know I will never give you a reason to doubt me again. After this confession, I pleased him in all the positions in which he desired me. I obeyed orders and did everything he came up with in his perverted head. We had such hard sex as if he was punishing me for shaking my trust. At some point, I moaned, as did he, and we came to the finish line. He pulled me away from him and frowned at me. This won't fix us. I knew it didn't go away with our sex or our date. A year later, the emotional pain was still very much alive. He was not quite the same as before, and I felt it. The sex was a little rougher. My phone wasn't always where I left it, and once or twice, I thought he was following me. Breaking someone's trust is the worst thing you can do. It's like fixing a broken plate. It's fixed, but it will never be as strong as before. I have to live with this, and it's hard. Some will say that I shouldn't have told him because why hurt him? Others will say that he should have divorced me because I am cheating, just waiting to happen. It's hard to argue with this, but I know myself. I know I won't fall. I may have been close to it, but I came out of it and put the lid on it. I'll never go that crazy again. Thank you for listening to this story. Now here is another exciting story for you to read. I hated my father when I was little. I had a favorite soft doll. She was affectionately called my Bieber. I carried my Bieber with me everywhere. I loved this doll so much that I could not part with it no matter who tried to take it away from me. My cousins always tormented and teased me by playing stay away, but I knew the secret of how to get Bieber back. All I had to do was cry and the boys would quickly stop playing their games. One night, I left it in the yard soon after dinner. I remembered that I had left my favorite doll. We lived in the village then. When I say it was dark outside, I mean pitch black. It was that kind of darkness when you walk down a dark alley and who knows what evil villains are lurking in the dark. These evil villains could range from scary monsters to zombies and ferocious animals with huge pointy teeth. To make matters worse, dark storm clouds were approaching and my Bieber was about to be washed away by the rain. But don't be afraid, I knew what to do. All I had to do was cry, and I was sure my father would come out, challenge the darkness, defeat all the monsters that hide in the shadows, and return my doll. After all, no one likes it when a girl cries. All the boys melt and do what I want when I cry. Not my father. No, he had the nerve to tell me to go myself, despite all my tears, sobs, and pouts. How could he do this to me? Didn't he love me? And just think, he had the audacity to ask me, if you love her so much, why did you leave her in the yard? Before I could answer this question, he said, if you really love your Bieber, you will face your worst nightmares to save her. Well, I'll show him. I stomped straight to my room, slammed the door, and cried all night. Mom tried to console me. I even heard them screaming downstairs. Mom knew the rule about what boys should do when girls cry. With every lightning strike and thunderous roar, my heart broke. My dad doesn't love me enough to go after my Bieber. Didn't he know he had to do this? I loved my Bieber. It's not my fault that I forgot about it in the yard. Needless to say, when morning came, I didn't have my doll. Okay, I'll just go and give my father the silent punishment. I've seen my mother do this many times. I even heard her talking on the phone to other boys, making fun of my father. Although I did not understand everything she said, she could even make him sleep on the couch when she was really angry with him. I couldn't wait to learn it. I was sure that my mother would teach me these abilities when I grew up. When I went outside and started looking, I simply couldn't find her. The storm must have washed it away. I started crying again, but now my father responded to my tears. He came up to me and asked what happened. I refused to answer him. I simply crossed my arms and gave him an angry, pouty expression, frowning my brows and pursing my lips. I just stared at him. I've seen Mom look like that when she's angry. Maybe this will work for me. Not a chance. My father just laughed and told me to go get the mail. I stood my ground. I wasn't going to let him laugh at me like my cousins did. I was going to become just like my mother. She just had more practice with it. Although I admit when my father raised his voice and demanded that I go get the mail, I lost my resolve. The last thing I wanted was to be whipped, not that my father had ever laid a hand on me, but the tone of his voice was quite intimidating. So I walked down the gravel path to the mailbox. Along the way, I kicked a rock or two, pouting my lips and muttering curses about how I wished my father would go away forever or how he needed to stay in the dark with all those monsters. Let's see how he likes it. It was my favorite stuffed toy, and he didn't care. When I approached the mailbox, the tears flowed even more than before. But these were not tears of sadness, these were tears of joy. In the mailbox, protected from the heavy rain the night before, lay my precious Bieber. It was not destroyed, she wasn't lost, she was safe and sound and back in my arms. I will never let this happen again. I promised Bieber over and over that I truly loved her and would never forget her again. I hated my father while I learned that the crying game wouldn't work on my dad. My mom refused to give up, the screams did not stop, the doors slammed, the dishes broke, and the phone calls when my father was not at home became more frequent. I never really heard what my mother was saying because she was always whispering on the phone, but I heard her giggle. Besides, she always hung up the phone when her father entered the house. One night, there was no shouting or screaming, no crying, no tears. Mom simply went into her room, packed a couple of suitcases, and left the house. A strange man in a red pickup truck was waiting for Mom in the driveway. She threw her suitcases into the back of the truck, climbed into the cab, and never looked back. I couldn't believe it. Mom left. Who will teach me the rules of the game of tears? Who will show me the pouch she used on my father to make him sleep on the couch? She had to teach me everything. Of course, my father spent hours telling me that her leaving was not my fault, that this is a problem between him and his mother. He said they both love me, but they need some time to sort out their differences. I was so angry at him for making my mom leave. I even spat back at him. If you really loved her, you would face your worst nightmares and follow her. Let me tell you something about my father. He was a big man, at least in the eyes of a child. He was strong when a child first sees this giant. Break down and cry. It changes everything. Mom showed me that he has a tender side. He was a weakling. I think that's exactly the word she used on the phone to one of her friends. Unfortunately, I was still just developing the abilities that my mother possessed. Even though my parents divorced, I still had to stay with my father. I begged and begged to live with my mother. After all, my father was a weakling. Besides, I needed to find out what other powers girls have over boys. My father, out of spite, insisted that I stay with him. He made sure that I never saw my mother in court or during divorce proceedings or even when I spoke with the judge. He made sure she was never there. In fact, he went so far as to force me to spend only one Christmas. All my other divorced friends said they loved Chris. Instead of one family Christmas, they have two. Some of them told stories about how one parent always felt guilty and smothered them with gifts, while the other gave several gifts, but they were very expensive. Why did I never get this? Why didn't I have this power? Look, this is all my father's doing. If I lived with my mother, I would know how to spend 2 Christmases. I hated my father. When I got older and went to high school, I hated doing homework. I hated going to class, especially biology. Do you know how disgusting it is to dissect a worm? It was even worse when we had to slaughter the pig. The stench was somehow ferocious. It was like going to the boys' locker room after football practice. Who cares about anatomy? Who cares about recessive genes and chromosomes? It's not like you hear people talk about it in real life. Luckily, I discovered that there are others who hate their parents as much as I hated my father. I will have every chance to spend time away from home and from my father. Even though I knew that my friends hated their parents, I was jealous of them. They would live in these huge houses. They had the latest gadgets, computers, and everything. My father never had anything like this. This was another reason to hate my father. He didn't buy me all the cool things. This was another loss of mine. No dating was the worst. I went on a date with a very nice guy. He did things that made my heart race, whether it was speeding through town at nearly 100 miles per hour or breaking into places we weren't supposed to be. The danger and excitement made my heart race. I was caught between fear and this roller coaster rush of adrenaline. So when the boy kissed me, it felt like my whole world was spinning. My head was floating in seventh heaven. This boy took me to heights I never thought possible. Unfortunately, my father had a way of quickly bringing me back to earth. When the boy dropped me off at the house, my father was already waiting for us. He had a pair of shotguns that he was conveniently cleaning as we pulled into the driveway. He made me come up to my room so he could chat with my boyfriend. Needless to say, I never dated this guy again. From that very night, the boys refused to meet me out of fear of my father. I knew crying on the stairs wouldn't help me. If I'm gone all evening, he'll just come looking for me. This was even more awkward than the gun cleaning incident. I couldn't believe my father was doing this to me. He was ruining my life. Just because his mom left him for some handsome guy doesn't mean he can take it out on me. But there comes a time in a child's life when he begins to look at his parents differently. While under house arrest for yet another violation of my father's rules, I decided to clean out one of the closets. After all, it was a place where I could put my clothes and shoes. While I may not have had many of the latest toys, gadgets, and electronic devices like all my friends, I had all the clothes I wanted. Walmart might not have been as fancy as Aeropostale or Abercrombie & Fitch, but getting 3 t-shirts for the price of one made sense to me. I worked hard for money and I wasn't about to throw it away on a blouse that would be out of style by next year. Okay, maybe my father's teaching wasn't so bad. His closet was in desperate need of cleaning. Time must have forgotten about this place because there were cobwebs everywhere. Okay, maybe not everywhere, but there was definitely a lot of it, the one you can't see, the one that gets in your hair and sticks to you no matter how many times you try to take it off. Some of the clothes hanging in that closet were definitely from a time warp. I couldn't believe that people would actually wear some of these things on purpose. While putting old clothes into trash bags so they could be given to Goodwill, I found my parents' wedding album and a few other souvenirs. Leafing through the album, despite the outdated fashion and long-forgotten hairstyles, my mother looked simply gorgeous in her white wedding dress. Her eyes showed love for my father. In addition, my father, who never wore a tie or jacket, looked very impressive in a rented tuxedo. Picture after picture brought back memories of when my parents were together when they were in love. But just like the faded photographs and the dust-covered album, that was so long ago. Yet, seeing my father in a much happier state of mind was completely different in recent years since his mother left. There was neither a sparkle in his eyes nor a spring in his gait. The only time I saw a glimpse of this reaction was when I received some kind of award from school. No matter how stupid it was, no matter the function or reason, my father was there to encourage me. In my opinion, he did this to confuse me to no end, but after I looked at these photos, my mind began to wonder if I was seeing everything clearly enough. Moreover, I have never seen my mother at these events. Putting aside the photo album, I came across a collection of letters. Judging by the size of the container, it contained a ton of love letters. It's amazing how sentimental they can be. It's not like now where people post their status on Facebook or tweet about their feelings for someone or even send a funny face. No, these letters were long and drawn out. They even had these funny little things on them called stamps and postal dates. This is probably what my teachers were talking about when they talked about the Pony Express. It may only have been a month, but I can't believe how much I love you. I see the sun shining in your hair, and your smile warms my heart. Your beautiful brown eyes have bewitched me. With just one word, I would reach to the very heavens and pluck out a shining star just for you. There's nothing I wouldn't do for you. I would go to all ends of the earth to return your golden fleece. Your beauty is incomparable, and the fact that you even entertain the thought of loving me back is very similar to Aphrodite and Hephaestus. You are my Venus, you are my Juliet. This is just an excerpt from one of my father's love letters. They were long and bright. My father was such a romantic then. What happened to this magic? What happened to that spark? Apparently, Mom loved these letters because she saved so many of them. However, as I quickly examined the envelopes in the other bundle and the handwriting on them, I noticed that something had changed. These letters at the back of the container were very different. They were short. They focused on physical sex rather than emotional love. They used vulgar language rather than poetic expressions of love, and yet the author used the words, "I love you." Why did Mom have them? It definitely wasn't written by my father. To make matters worse, these letters were dated after my parents' wedding. What's happening? The first set of letters was romantic and sweet and could melt a girl's heart. They focused on love and life together. In the second bunch, the letters were rude and unpleasant, focusing on the physical and vulgar. The grammatical and spelling errors were enough to make me want to throw up. However, my stomach turned when I came across the latest discovery in this closet. It was from a laboratory in California. The contents of this letter changed my life forever. This changed everything. Except one thing. I hated my father. How could he hide the secret from me? Although if I really thought about it, it shouldn't have come as a surprise. My father wore his hair high and tight. It was dark brown. Mom always loved the way her long brown hair fell in dark curls over her shoulders. Even in their wedding photographs, their brown eyes shone with love and happiness. Maybe my blonde hair and blue eyes were just recessive genes. That's what they taught in biology. How could my father be so mean and hide the truth from me? The official letter said that I was not my father's daughter. How could he do this to me? Why did he hide my real father from me? He must have forced my mother not to tell me anything. I never knew that he was not my real father after everything he did for me. I can't believe he could lie. He made me call him Dad. I needed answers, and I certainly couldn't trust a man who had hidden it from me my entire life. No, I needed to find my mom and get her to tell me what was going on. Maybe then she will explain how she could marry such an evil monster like my father. Tracking her down took more effort than I thought. I called my grandparents, but they haven't seen her since she left my father. All the aunts and uncles didn't seem too interested in her whereabouts. I was ready to give up when, while reading the newspaper, I came across a police note. There was a domestic dispute at one of the trailer parks, and the name of the mother and some other guy were listed there. I'll finally get answers. I don't know what I expected. Perhaps I was hoping that the heavens would open up and everything bad in my life would be destroyed, that my mother's house will become a utopia and I can escape from the evil that lurks in my own home. Unfortunately, this was not the case. Instead, the front yard of this trailer park was littered with dirt and debris. Was the owner running a junkyard or just holding a sale for the last 2 years? The grass was either dead or overgrown. My father would have had a stroke if he had seen what this yard looked like with the amount of time he spent maintaining his lawn. The place was an absolute disaster and the antithesis of home. Mom must have noticed me driving up because she greeted me first. At first, she didn't recognize me. I didn't recognize her myself. Her dyed blonde hair looked fake and her dark roots could be easily seen. While tattoos were probably a good idea at the time she got them, they are not so much now. Since she left my father, she has allowed herself to relax. When she finally realized that I was her daughter, she hugged me and I could smell the nicotine on her clothes. However, the tearful reunion did not last long. I immediately asked her who my father was. At first, she tried to lie, saying that my father was my real father. However, I showed her a letter from a laboratory in California. She frowned and finally said that my real father was a mistake, that she loved my father, and my biological father was just a guy she met at the diner where she worked. They had some kind of affair that lasted about a year, but one evening he ran out of town and was never seen again. Around the same time, this balding, pot-bellied beast came out of the trailer. My biological father may have been a mistake, but in that moment I realized that the summer clothes I chose that day were a huge mistake. This ugly pervert looked at me like I was a piece of meat. Is this the guy my mom left my dad for? I threw up and then I left. Just like my mom, I never looked back. I hated my father. I finally met a boy who lived through the shotgun cleaning conversation and endured everything my father could throw at him to make sure he respected and loved me for who I was as a person, not for my appearance. I finally met a guy who could make my heart beat faster, not because I lived in the moment, but because of the time we spent together. All the other boys my father protected me from had girlfriends who got pregnant before they even finished school. Some of them tried to be good fathers, but most of them ran away from their responsibilities. This boy is completely different. He even earned my father's approval by proposing to me. But who will lead me to the altar? Who will give me away at my own wedding? Who will be the last person to hold my hand before I become Mrs. Banks Williams? I can't ask my biological father for this because I don't even know who he is. I'm certainly not going to ask my mom's boyfriend or whoever he is to do this because the thought of being that close to him makes me sick. No, my father must hand me over to my fiancée. My father raised me like his own daughter. He loved me as if I were his own flesh and blood. He made me feel loved and gave me everything a child could need. He forgave my mom because he loved her and truly believed she was sorry when she was just a cheater. He taught me the difference between love and lust. He taught me that love should be unconditional but also reciprocated. He taught me that you should want to do whatever it takes for the person you love as long as there is the same love in return. My father also taught me the difference between life and existence. Life in the present lasts only a few seconds. It's forgotten before you realize it. Life, especially with a loved one, lasts a lifetime. My father was called a weakling and a cuck by some people in the community, but he was more of a man than any of my mother's lovers. Tell me about a man who has the strength to accept that his daughter is not his flesh and blood, but to raise her and love her as his only angel. Well, this man is my father. I hate my father. I hate my father because he died before I could tell him that I loved him with all my heart and will always be grateful to him for what he taught me. I want to hyphenate my name so that everyone knows that I am first and foremost my father's daughter. Dad, I love you so much. There wasn't a dry eye as Melissa Banks walked off the podium and collapsed in tears at the head of her father's coffin. Her fiancé, Aaron Williams, rushed to her side to comfort her during her loss. It was at this point that he completely understood his fiancée and no longer complained about her desire to hyphenate her name in memory of her father. Even the old gossip girls who had been gossiping about Liz Banks' numerous flings with men and Steve Banks's lack of action looked away in shame. The only word that was spoken was a quiet amen from the pastor. Dear viewers, thank you for staying with us and supporting our channel. See you again.